Daily Podcast. I am your host, Stuart Deming, and today's episode is brought to you by XPLR Tours. If you want to learn about the city of Nashville, come take a walking tour with us. We have the Downtown Nashville History Walking Tour. This is a 2-hour-long tour that takes place throughout downtown. We learn about the history of how Tennessee was formed and where it is going today. You can go over to XPLRtours.com to book your ticket today. Use code ND10 to take 10% off your order. We hope that you enjoyed the day trip series. We went all out throughout the state of Tennessee, from Sevierville to Chattanooga, even up the road to Bowling Green, Kentucky. So we hope that you enjoyed that day trip series. We are getting back into the swing of regular episodes as of today. And joining me in studio is mayoral candidate Jeff Yarbro. You're also a senator for the state of Tennessee. Jeff, good morning, and how are you?
Morning. I'm doing great, sir.
So, Jeff, how are you feeling? We're about a week and 2 days away from the election.
Right.
So how are you feeling right now for this election?
I'm feeling great. I mean, this is the fun part of campaigns, if you like this kind of work, because you can feel people in the city starting to really pay attention to this, and not just pay attention to what campaign they enjoy following, but trying to decide who's going to be the mayor that I trust to lead the city for the next 4 years. And there's a lot of good candidates, and it's really fun to be out moving from one end of the county to the other for 12 hours, 14 hours a day, trying to convince them to vote along the way. So.
Are you, like, right now in the campaign trail, are you going door to door, or is it more still meetings? Because there's no more forums or anything, right?
So there are no more forums, so we're doing a little bit of everything. So It's not unusual for me to spend a couple hours knocking on doors. Already this morning, we were out talking to our waste services department, having events through 7 or 9, I think from 7 to 9 o'clock tonight. And so there's just events every day. Then when we have downtime, we're usually sitting outside of a polling location, holding signs and waving at voters as they're coming in to make their decisions. And some folks are making up their minds right there at the polling locations before they vote. But we feel great about where the race is. I mean, I think a poll came out yesterday sort of showing us effectively tied in that second place position, which in the goal to get into the runoff, that's exactly where we want to be, and we can feel the momentum heading our way.
Yeah, so if you wanted to see that poll, the Tennessean quotes the poll. They did a good job going through the demographics and everything of that poll. I think the poll was conducted from 500 people, I believe.
I believe that's right.
Yeah, so it seems like a smaller poll compared to some other polls, but
I think that's actually sort of
the normal.
I don't know. I think that's the standard size. But look, I mean, the only poll that matters is the poll, that they cast on election day.
Yeah.
It's not, I mean, people talk about donors, people watch like the Twitter debate, people watch these polls. What really matters is how many votes are going to get cast on election day. And we feel good in the fact that, I've been representing, over 200,000 people in the county for the last 9 years in the Senate. I think people know who I am. They know what I'm about. They know that I'm not going to BS them about how things are going. And I think that people are going to revert to someone they trust and they know has the experience to do the job.
So let's talk into that for a second. So 9 years ago, you ran for senator for which part or district?
Well, so the district that
they changed, yeah.
I mean, they change every once in a while, but the district that I had for the first 8 years, it included portions of 24 of Nashville's 35 council districts.
Okay.
So it started way up in Madison and went
all the way down to like Bellmead and Oak Hill.
Well, went through Inglewood, East Nashville, crossed the river, did Priest Lake, Cane Ridge, Nolensville Pike, Vanderbilt, Belmont, over into Hillwood. So
that's a large district. So what was like campaign? I assume it's completely different. Campaigning for a senator position than a mayoral position. First off, you have way less people running, I would assume.
Usually.
So what's the difference between the two campaigns that you've noticed?
Well, there's a few big differences. I mean, one is that the Senate job is a partisan job, and so you're always in a Democratic primary or in a general election where it's a Democrat versus a Republican, whereas this is nonpartisan. It's really just about how the city's going to move forward. I think the bigger difference is a lot of times when you tell somebody you're running for the state senate, you got to sort of walk through what it is the state senate does compared to the rest, to, what's happening in Washington or in the city. But when you tell somebody you're running for mayor, they just bring their problems to you. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I had somebody who was like, you're running for mayor. Well, there's there's people that live next door to me, and I need them out of the house.
Or there's this pothole that needs to be fixed.
There's this pothole. There's something on this corner. There, what are, like, my commute to work is, is full of potholes. I mean, people will bring you their real problems. I mean, but that's what makes it such a great job. It's what makes it a hard job, but because I think all the problems in the city, like, they land on your doorstep. But what makes it a great job is there's no place in politics or public service where you have the chance to have just a real impact in people's lives every day.
So where was the decision of you saying, okay, I'm a lawyer by trade, I'm a senator by parts of the month, part-time, I guess, define that, what, you're in session 3 months out of the year?
4 or 5 months.
4 months, okay. So you're a senator part-time, but also still full-time a lawyer, which is always really confusing. And then where was the decision to say, okay, I'm going to try my hand at running at mayor?
So I didn't think about running until John Cooper decided that he wasn't going to run again.
And that was what, February or so this year?
Late January, early February. So, and that's because the job I do in the state senate is oftentimes playing defense and offense for the city. Especially this year, we had legislation that was targeting Nashville's airport, convention center, sports authority. And so regardless of which mayor it's been over the last 9 years, and there have been a few, it's been 4 mayors, but I talk to that office 2 or 3 times a week, and, to do the job that Nashville's already elected me to do, I can't really be crossways with the city, that mayor. So I didn't think about doing it until he stepped down. But when he did, I think 2 things. One, I think that the city is at a crossroads about how it's going to grow, whether everybody's going to be part of that growth, whether we're going to be intentional in the way that we, ensure that our values direct our future. And then I think, second, we're at a moment of kind of unprecedented level of conflict between the state government and the city, right? I mean, the next mayor is in a unique position where because of the conflict with the state, Nashville doesn't have a member of Congress right now. It has 3 members of Congress, all of whom live an hour away. The next mayor is going to inherit a city that has 3 pending lawsuits with the state of Tennessee, as well as numerous pieces of legislation that are targeting us. And if we can't figure out a way to normalize that relationship and navigate it, it's going to be a really complicated task for anybody who's going to be the next mayor. And I think there's no one who has the sort of depth of experience both working on the issues that are facing the city and the capacity to navigate both the city and state governments at the same time. But I think that's sort of a new job qualification at this point.
Hands down, and it's been interesting to watch the conflict really pan out over the last 6 months.
Right.
So with that division right now, if you were elected mayor, what's the first thing you would do to try to resolve that relationship?
Well, look, I mean, I think there's a few different things that you would do really early. I mean, first, I think it starts with relationships, like most things. And so I think the next mayor needs to, like, I would want to visit with the governor, with the 2 speakers, and with a lot of the legislators who I've been serving with for the last several years. But I think you would also start by probably appointing someone as a full-time staffer who's going to be paying attention to all of the places where the city and state government interact. And
which is a lot of
places.
The East Bank is a great example of that.
The East Bank's a great example. I mean, there's almost no issue that we really talk about that doesn't have a state component. I mean, think of the most local issue you can, like fixing potholes.
It's
Fixing potholes on state roads
It's a state issue.
is a state issue. And so if you want Metro government to fix those potholes and get reimbursed, that's going to require passing legislation through the General Assembly. And I think that's something that people think of as a city issue, but that is very much a state issue. If you want to build transit, you're going to have to be working hand in glove with the state government. And so the state is an obstacle that we don't need and a partner we would prefer to have on almost every issue. And so that you've got to be able to do two things at once that feel contradictory, right? I mean, I think some people say, like, I don't know, do we want a mayor who's going to fight back against the state or a mayor who's going to make peace with the state? And the reality is that the next mayor has to be able to do both of those things at the exact same time. And, I don't think there's any candidate in this race and very few people in the city, frankly, who have as much experience as I do doing either of those things.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the city wants to have its own identity, but at the end of the day, we are in the middle of Tennessee. And so it's that balance. It's trying to figure out, like, hey, what's best for both parties in this situation.
And frankly, it's best for both parties for Nashville to have its own identity.
Yes,
absolutely. This is a dumb fight. Let's be very clear. I mean, I told somebody it's like getting in a fight with your spouse and burning down the garage to get even. Like, it might make you feel good for a few minutes, but at the end of the day, it hasn't served the state's long-term interest if Nashville starts losing its identity. Right? I mean, the companies that are choosing to locate here, the people that are choosing to stay in Nashville or to move into Nashville, they're drawn to the cultural, offerings that we have, to the welcoming, inclusive community that we are. And I think if we lose those things, we lose what makes us special, and I think lose the appeal to, what's created the space for Nashville to drive, an incredibly disproportionate share of the economic and cultural growth of the state in the last 2 decades.
Oh, hands down. So the last few months, we've been posing this question to artists and some business owners here on the podcast. And the question is Nashville losing its branding? Speaking of its identity, its branding of Music City. And a lot of artists are saying, hey, because of affordable housing, I can't live in this city. There's potential that it's losing its branding. So what do you think of that question?
I'm so glad you're asking me that question because I think it's one of the most important issues facing the city. The most dangerous thing for us is for Music City to become this cheap plastic
corporate
label that we just slap on the side of beer cans and event signs and think that makes us some sort of cultural space. You don't want it to be a cheap brand. It needs to be much more of an identity, where our commitment to music and the arts and creativity and culture is part of our DNA and is sort of manifested throughout the city. And you're exactly right. When people can't afford to live here, it makes that very difficult. I mean, we've gotten to a place where, moving to Nashville with $1 and a dream as a songwriter is sort of like that's only really possible in country music lyrics as opposed to in real life.
Yep.
And
because I think the statistic came out last week from Smart Asset. Nashville has the highest growing rent rate or something in the country.
Right. I mean, they're up over 100% in a decade, right?
Yeah.
And that's, our current affordable housing strategy is keep on driving until you can afford something, which is both a really bad housing strategy as well as a terrible transportation strategy.
Well, then it's also a terrible workforce strategy.
And so it's not. I mean, housing is the issue that comes up the most on the campaign trail, and it comes up in 1,000 different ways. It comes up from small businesses who are trying to hire workers, but they're seeing people who are leaving for jobs that pay less.
That are closer
to where they live.
Because of the less stress of travel.
If you think about a lot of our problems when it comes to our public schools, it's recruiting and retaining teachers. When it comes to our police force, it's recruiting and retaining officers. And if you go and talk to the people who are doing those jobs, they'll tell you, I can't afford to live here, right? And so, I think the way we think about going after those housing problems from one end of the county to the next and actually having a strategy to do so. That is going to be a huge project for the next mayor.
Could you give me a little insight into what your strategy is for that?
Sure. I mean, I think fundamentally we have to have more housing.
Yes.
I mean, everybody would like for there to be some magic wand solution to just make housing less expensive. But when you have more people that want to live a place than you got places to live, it's going to put price pressure on every part of the housing market, and that's what we're seeing. Like, we don't have enough Section 8 housing that's sort of traditionally defined affordable, but we don't have enough workforce. We don't have enough starter homes. We don't have the locations for seniors that want to downsize. We don't have supportive housing for vulnerable populations. And so I think there's a few things. One, I think we do have to have some intentional growth that is a little bit more vertical and dense and walkable, and ideally supported by transit. Because, I mean, first, that is actually what a lot of the people who are moving to town as young people or graduating from school, that is what they're looking for. It's what a lot of our retirees are looking for, and we're actually not meeting some of that demand. We're certainly not meeting that demand unless you can afford kind of luxury accommodations, right?
So even then, if you can afford it, doesn't mean they're available.
Doesn't mean that they're available.
Yeah.
Right. And so then I think we also have to, along corridors, think about how we're creating a little bit more density as we go. That's supported by infrastructure. That's supported by, that meets the demands of people. Now, I mean, Nashville is there are only 20 cities in America that have more people than Nashville.
But from a statistical area standpoint, we're in third or fourth in the country. We have 534 square miles.
Right. That's exactly what I was going to say.
It's a massive area.
It's a massive area. I mean,
it could take you an hour to drive across the county.
That's right. And so we don't have to have mid-rise, density from one end of the county to the next. But we do have to be pretty intentional about having some more density in certain parts of the city, just to accommodate the needs and demands of the population. I think second, we got to figure out a way to clean up, speed up, and the permitting, inspecting process. It's taking too long. It's far too difficult for people that are trying to build to go through that process, and that literally makes it harder for them to do the work.
And
makes it more expensive for them, and then ultimately the end user. I think we also should be taking advantage of the property tax freezes to ensure that people aren't getting pushed out of the neighborhoods they help build.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I think, but if you don't get the private sector into this, I mean, this is not a government program that gets you to the housing you need. The government's going to have to be part of really driving those things that the market's not going to create.
Yep.
Like, your government's got to be part of the supportive housing. Probably has to initiate some of the work, when you try to think about creating artistic districts, where we're really trying to drive affordable housing for creatives. But I think that primarily you got to figure out a way that people are making money by building more affordable housing.
And I think Metro Council, they passed that law where it's the tax incentive. Basically, if you're building a certain amount of your inventory, you get less on your property taxes, I think over a 10-year period or something.
That's right.
I can't remember the exact dates. But that's a really good incentive. So you mentioned the creative class. And recently on your campaign, you came out with this new strategy for the creative class. So break that down for me, and what does that look like?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think that the real point here is that you can't just assume that this is going to take care of itself. And historically speaking, that's never been the case. There's always been some linkage between the leadership of the city, both philanthropic and government, and the development of the arts. And I think that, especially in a city that's dealing with housing issues, we've got to make sure that we're dealing with that. So, I mean, one, I think if Nashville ceases to be a live music city, then we
done.
see it,
then
we're done,
yep.
Right? And so part of it is creating sort of a music venue fund, so that we're really trying to incentivize that sort of work.
I know Jeff Syracuse was very vocal about that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and he's somebody who has experience in the industry that does, understand that universe, and I think knows the need for it. I mean, I think we need to be finding ways that we're repurposing old spaces to turn them into creative spaces. We need to be increasingly, just like we have historically tried to set aside part of our capital budget to fund public art, we should be funding, trying to reach 1% of our annual budget to support arts throughout the city. And I think that is an important thing to do. Part of it is we should bring back Live on the Green.
No, yeah, I don't know why that went away.
I mean that one just befuddles me because especially when
I wonder if it was like more of a logistical issue
I'm not
of,
sure
of
if it was
security
logistical or funding,
yeah.
but I think it's so important that there are events that feel like they're ours as Nashvillians. I mean, look, we know there's going to be like the NFL drafts and the NHL draft and all these like sort of big deal events that bring in people from all over the country. And we're largely fine with that because usually some of us enjoy at least one of those every year. But I think there need to be some of these, sort of free events that are for us that bring us together as a community to celebrate arts, to celebrate music. And I think that Live on the Green is a great example of that, and we should do it. And then finally, I think we've got to deal with, the sort of parking issues. I mean, I know that might sound like a small ball issue, but
when
it's not.
When it's $60 for an hour and a half,
$50
at places,
for to be there. I mean, that's when you're working for tips. Largely, I mean that can mean the difference between making money that night and not, between making rent and not. And so I think we've got to find ways that we're accommodating, the people who are making Nashville what it is as we go. And one other idea that's in that is, I mean, I think that we have to be thoughtful not just about making sure that artists have affordable housing, but that we're providing the affordable spaces for people to do creative work. Like, how are we making it more possible to, record, film scores? How are we making it more possible for artists and sculptors to have creative space or rehearsal space for musicians? And I think that is should be done sort of through districts, if you will, like where we really try to create hubs throughout the county where you're kind of creating a natural center of gravity for artist communities to gather and form. Because I think anybody that really spends time with artists knows that, it's actually different artists from different, modes and genres kind of coming together that then gives you the capacity for new creativity to kind of emerge.
And I think there's some really good examples around Nashville, like the Forge.
Right.
I think it's Create 615. That's a brand new one it's near Murfreesboro Pike.
Right.
There's that one in East Nashville right off of Main Street. So there's
I think the
hubs.
Buchanan Arts District is kind of incredible, like where
Yep.
you've got Elephant Gallery and like there's several different creative spaces there. I mean, I think that is the, being a little bit intentional without making that, sort of cookie cutter.
Yeah.
Because you want it to still reflect neighborhood and creative influence.
Of course.
But I think ways to try to foster that it should be intentional.
So speaking of neighborhoods, one of the biggest pieces of conversation over the next 4 years for this next mayor is going to be the East Bank. This is going to be. I've talked to some real estate experts that have traveled around the world, and they are comparing where Nashville is to Dubai. And
Wow.
and some of these guys are saying Nashville. Like I literally heard a story this last week. Like people are coming here just to look at the land in the East Bank, and there's nothing there yet. And that's a really good sign because it's going to be a very heavy district, especially once PSC Metals fully decides to get out, because they will.
Right.
So what's your thoughts on the East Bank, and how, if you win Mayoral, the mayoral election, what are your plans for the East Bank? I know the housing and bringing all this stuff, but like, let's break that down a little bit more.
Look, I mean, I think that the next mayor is going to have to spend a fair bit of time really focusing on the East Bank and how it should be the sort of set of principles by which we grow everywhere, really.
Yep.
I mean, and I hope that means good, right?
Yeah.
Like that needs to be because we're being intentional about it, that how we're incorporating transit, walkability, affordability, green space, and genuine community building into the place.
Because what you do in the East Bank is going to affect the city of Nashville for the next 200 years
City of
or
Nashville
more.
for a long time.
Yeah.
And you don't want that to be sort of a continuation you don't want just the Broadway Entertainment District to spill over into East Nashville and we're not just trying to create additional pedal tavern stops.
Yep.
I think so. One of the things that's most important to me is that we're actually building a real community, one that is intergenerational and has different incomes of people that are coming together. Like this is that sort of opportunity, and I think that's probably the only way it works. I don't want to just see too much of our downtown space be for 20 somethings who just moved in and retirees. Like you need people to be able to live there for longer time periods. And so I think the way that you actually the focus on having distinct distinct feeling neighborhoods over there matters. I think the way that we build transit into the bones of the East Bank is a huge both opportunity and responsibility for the next mayor. One of the challenges that we have on transit is a lot of our downtown streetscape really comes from the time when like Andrew Jackson was practicing law and people were riding around on horses.
Yep.
So we don't have the sort of scale of street that makes transit making street level transit isn't easy here, right?
Yeah, and now a good example of this, I picked up some clients at the Four Seasons this last weekend. And I'm like, I got stuck there onto Mumbrian, and I'm like, the Four Seasons literally should just move their building 10 feet back,
right?
So they could have had an additional lane here for turning. And what's crazy, and I'm complaining about this, but like I waited 10 minutes to turn into the Four Seasons, and I'm like, this should not be happening on this main corridor in a street going to like a predominant hotel here. So it's just it's super interesting.
But I think that's when you're starting from the parking lots of the East Bank, you really do get to ensure that you're building, dedicated lane transit into that you're building pedestrian infrastructure into that. And I think that's a really important thing for the city. And then I think building affordability into it so it actually feels more like a Wrigleyville. And I think the less it feels like a sort of luxury enclave over there, the better.
Yeah.
There's obviously there's going to be some high end places.
Probably the Travel America site.
Right.
Yeah.
But that doesn't need to be the entirety of it. And I'll tell you the other thing that I don't think has gotten as much attention is it's this huge opportunity for us to reclaim the river. Right? The river is really it's why the city's here.
Yes.
And being a transportation hub both on the river and the railroads is how the city grew originally, right? And so being able to reclaim that river as a public space and making it a public asset for members of the community, that is something that I think is a long overdue need for the city. And I think that that development, especially with the sort of green space envisioned going into whatever the stadium piece, does create that opportunity for us to create some green space commons for Nashville residents.
Some water taxis.
Right. And I think the way that, there's been a lot of talk about like the public investment, but when there's public investment, it needs to be a public asset.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the next mayor's real responsibility is to ensure that this is something that we can be proud of and that it's an asset to the members of our community.
So speaking of public assets, you have the Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway.
Right.
That is technically a public asset, and it's in the charter of the city of Nashville that Nashville needs to take care of this thing. And the city has failed at taking care of that racetrack. So what's your thoughts on the racetrack, and what would you do to help fix it if you could?
Yeah, I think that is something that the current council has been considering a plan and doesn't look like they're going to make progress on that.
Yep.
It looks like that's going to be kicked over to the next term.
And that's what it seems to be doing every single term.
Right.
Yeah.
And look, I am loath to see Nashville taxpayers take on a new obligation when it comes to to financing a sports venue right now. I mean, I think
we have fatigue. We have stadium fatigue.
I think we have serious fatigue until you actually. I mean, I think somebody mentioned like Major League Baseball to me. I was like, I think a lot of people in Nashville want to see us invest in some little league fields before we start talking about another big league sport.
The thing that's interesting about the Nashville Stars is, according to their organization, it's going to be completely privately funded,
and that is a beautiful thing.
Yes.
People that want to talk about how you're going to privately finance and it's not going to be coming, not going to require taxpayers being a backstop. I think those are conversations that we're eager to have as a city right now. And but I don't. But I think that we got to be very careful when it comes to Nashville taxpayer money and ensuring that we're really focusing on consolidating, making sure that this is a great place to live in order to before we start thinking about whatever those other big projects down the road. And so that's sort of my instinctual approach as it comes to the racetrack. I mean, look, I grew up. I'm from Dyersburg, Tennessee. Grew up wishing that I was related to Jeff Yarbro. So I like racing, but I don't know that we need to be jumping, feet first into a huge construction project. So, but
especially because there's so many construction projects in town.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I think the next mayor's going to have to figure out a way to navigate that and figure out what the future of that location is. That's really consistent with what Nashville's voted on in the charter, and it might mean that we have to sort of put competing visions of this in front of the voters again. And sort of think through what choice are we willing to make as a city.
Yep. So last question from me is, crime has been rising dramatically over the last couple weeks, it seems like.
Right.
Especially in surrounding counties and in Nashville counties. So if you were elected mayor, what's one thing that you would do to reduce crime in the city? So that's hard. That's a really hard question because you can't control other people. But
well, there's certainly no magic wand, and so I think there are a few things that you would want to do. One, we know that a lot of our crime is being driven by guns right now, or the crime that's scaring people every day is with the gunshots.
But there's drug trade, there's human trafficking.
I was going to get but I do think that the next mayor should try to coordinate our approach to gun violence across city agencies from the mayor's office. And that involves places that from the Metro Police obviously play a significant role, but most of us don't define our safety by how fast crimes are responded to in our neighborhood. We don't really want the crimes to happen in the first place.
Yeah.
And so I think we do have to have a well-trained, fully staffed, well-compensated, and accountable police force. But I think we also have to pay a lot of attention to the built environment. It turns out that improving the quality of street lighting in a location can reduce overnight crime in a community.
Well, even having I met with a guy. His name's Reggie. I can't remember his last name. He started an urban farm in Antioch.
Right.
You may have met Reggie. And he started an urban farm. I think it was on 2.5 acres or something like that. And in that community, crime has gone down close to 35% over the last 2 years because people have a purpose of going to this urban garden and working in that environment.
That's right. When you're intentional about the way you create public spaces, intentional about the way that you address neglect, whether that's broken sidewalks or vacant lots or kind of blighted portions of the community, you actually can see improvement, and that's what you're trying to really go after. If you're trying to get to the root cause, you have to deal with where opportunity's been abandoned, when you haven't really invested in kids on the front end in our that are coming through the system. I think that effective interventions in juvenile court is probably the most important thing you do from a long-term safety. But I think you always want to have the one clean solution, but we're a big city. There's a lot of complicated issues, and a lot of this is the day-to-day work that you're doing, making sure that you're dealing effectively with juveniles who are coming in our system, thinking about people who are being released and how you're working through reentry to make sure that they find successful paths back into society and not back into crime. I mean, I think the way that you're really thinking through that and having the kind of ecosystem of governmental systems, faith communities, nonprofits all working together along towards the same end, that is how you make a big difference in the longer run.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeff, where can people learn more about your campaign? And I know you're not supposed to say this, but what's your favorite polling station in town?
Well, I mean, look, my favorite polling station is my personal precinct because it's my child's elementary school. So that's the one. But I don't have a favorite early voting location. I want you to go to all 12 of those, and I'll try to be at. I'm going to be at every one of them in the next
Does early
now and Saturday.
Early voting stops a couple days beforehand.
Early
right?
voting is open until Saturday of this week.
Okay.
And then you have to go to your precinct if you're voting on August 3rd. And so I ask that everybody get out and vote. I would love to ask you to vote for me, but even if you don't vote for me, please go out and take part in choosing the district council people, at-large council people, vice mayor and mayor.
Which that one, the at-large council people, I looked at when I went to go vote. I'm like, 25 people. I don't even.
It's a daunting list.
It is a very daunting list. It's more daunting than the mayor.
But I'll
list.
tell you what. I mean, here's the best thing is that everybody always complains about, I hate it when we have to choose the least two evils in an election. It turns out it's far harder for people when there's multiple people that they like.
Yeah.
And this, I think, race, both at the mayoral level and the council at large level, there's a lot of candidates that people like, and that's because why wouldn't you want to be part of this city?
Mm-hmm.
Why wouldn't you want to be part of building this city's future? And I think there's been a lot of doom and gloom and pessimism out there on the campaign trail, and that, to me, is something that we should reject as a city. I mean, do we have problems? Of course we do. Am I frustrated by traffic? Yes, I drive in Nashville. Of course I'm frustrated by it. But we've got a better set of problems and a better set of assets than almost any other city in America, and it's an exciting time. And I think the way that you're seeing people who want to be part of governing the city and its future shows that, to be honest. So you can learn more about my campaign at jeffyarbro.com. You can follow me I'm on the socials from, I guess, I don't know, the Twitters, Yarbro, Instagrams, Jeff Yarbro, Threads, Jeff Yarbro. So please, or you can just call my cell phone, 615-496-9851.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thanks, Stuart.
Head over to Nashville Daily Podcast to learn more about Jeff and what he's doing for the city, and then visit his website at jeffyarborough.com. And thank you guys for watching the Nashville Daily Podcast. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, head over to our Instagram, Nashville Daily Podcast, and we'll see you guys tomorrow. Thank you for listening to the Nashville Daily Podcast. If you want to learn more, head to NashvilleDailyPodcast.com.
You can also follow us on social media at explore.nash on Instagram, Nashville Daily Podcast on YouTube, and explore.nash on YouTube as well.
The Nashville Daily Podcast is an Explore LLC production, copyright 2023.